Welcome everyone to this discovery interview journey with June Holley. I'm Leslie Meehan, co-hosting with Ben Roberts and Dunya from the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory. We're hosting a listening discovery journey with many leaders in the field of collaborative funding of the Thriving Resilient Communities movement. And we're delighted to welcome all of the people who are on the journey today. June's going to be basically sharing her story and vision. We have some specific questions for her to talk about, and then we'll open the call for a more open conversation in the last 45 minutes, half hour or so. First, I'd like to welcome June. Thank you for joining us and share a little bit about who June is. She's a shero of mine who's been weaving economic and community networks for many years, for decades. She was the executive director of the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks, and she stepped down to devote her energies to help communities around the globe form system-shifting networks. I love that. And she's training and supporting network weavers. And she's now shifting her energy to support the infrastructures needed so that networking and self-organizing strategies can expand rapidly throughout the world, which many of us, and probably all of us in some way on this call, are all about. I've been following June's work for a long time and just am thrilled to have her with us here today. So thank you, June.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
So we're about system shifting networks that move money, and I know you are too. So this interview is kind of a spontaneous, friendly, appreciative style inquiry process. We're just looking for what's working well in your world and what you imagine a positive outcome for the future might be. So this is a visionary, dreaming kind of a time. It's going to be fun. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So we're going to start first with our favorite place with the story, asking you to tell us about a specific experience that you've had related to collaborative or democratic funding, whatever language you use, that was highly successful or valuable in some way. And we like to have something that you have some personal experience with involving networks, which I'm sure it will be.
Right. Well, I just want to start by saying I don't think money is the problem. There is lots of money. When you think about how much people put into like this campaign, and people everywhere just emptied their pockets. So I don't think the problem is money. So I want to put that, just the story in that light. But I think there really are things that we have to shift certain ways of thinking about money before it really starts flowing into networks. And so, I think one of the first things that this organization AceNet, which had a kitchen incubator, which is a licensed processing facility, and we worked with, over time, probably 1,000 entrepreneurs, either helping them start or expand. And really early on, we had a network strategy because we couldn't get that many resources. We're out in these hills, and there are no funders here to speak of that would fund our work. And so we had to be really imaginative about how to get people what they needed. And we developed network strategies where entrepreneurs helped each other and worked on things together. And so very early on, we made the decision that we were never going to apply for funding by ourselves. Every grant that we wrote had other community partners involved. or innovation funds, I call them, for the entrepreneurs. And so, I feel like that's the first step. When you start thinking of money for networks, you have to think about it in network ways. And so you have to spend time building networks and building collaboratives to be able to unleash all kinds of money. And so we were able to access, some really substantial large grants because we had such a fabulous array of partners and people in the community involved in what we were doing. And so I think that even any network needs to think not just about itself as an entity and getting money, but first of all, trying to make that collaborative, and whether it's people within the network helping them raise money, but also, putting money in new forms. I feel like one of the biggest problems is that foundations, for the most part, don't understand networks. In fact, network thinking is really anathema to what they are. They're very rigid, hierarchical,
Oh, yeah.
bureaucratic, for the most part. I don't want to overgeneralize. And so, figuring out ways to take that money and put it in packages and into ecosystems that are going to be what networks need. And that's why really a first start is that I've seen, and what we did even back in the early days of AceNet, is to try to get money to flow into more participative, democratic, networked structures like innovation funds, where you get a pool of funds and then the community decides how that money is going to be distributed to collaborative projects or to entrepreneurs. So started very, very early thinking about network approaches to money. I could talk more about that, but
I love,
you go ahead, Leslie.
no, go ahead.
I mean, I just think people don't realize that to get money to flow into networks, you have to spend a lot of time building networks and building network connections and building network ownership and a sense of responsibility and whatever, so that basically you're not alone in thinking about this. You're actually, like, here's another story, is that the Network Weaver site, and I put the link in and I misspelled it. Maybe somebody can correct it for me, but I put it in the chat. We like less than, I mean, maybe it was even only a year ago or whatever, that maybe a year and a half now, that, we decided, hey, we want more people to know about all the resources. There's tons and tons of free resources on that site. And so we had our mailing list was about 1,000 people. And by reaching out to everybody we knew, like I just went through my inbox and added like another 1,000 people that I'd been in contact with in the last year. And then, sending out to others, asking them to give names. And we now reach 19,000 people all over the world. In just like a year and a half, we've grown, been able to build the network that much, and encouraging people to bring in their friends and colleagues, into the network. And once you have, I mean, not that 19,000 in a world of 7 billion is really all that much, but it is really a lot more than 1,000. And so instead of just having a little bubble, you spend, so now we spend a year and a half, and we're going to now do some fundraising, some crowdfunding to help support the site, which I've been supporting for since its beginning. I've just been supporting it, and so. But we took time to build the network first, build the network, build the sense that people were connected to each other. There's been all kinds of activities and things for people to get involved with around that, so that they can begin to to see this as their network and something that they'd like to support. We got tons of people. Now, it started out, I was the only one writing blog posts. Now we've had about 50 different people contributing blog posts and to the site. And we now have about 50 resources. And I think most of them now are from people, not me. And so that's a really good feeling of moving from one person starting something into, this network that now has the capacity to get money to flow into it.
Yes, I hear you. It takes time. We've had that experience too. And could I ask you to talk a little bit more about AceNet, since it sounds like that was a longer trajectory, just understanding more like how many
Mhm.
groups were involved and how much money did you move? Are you moving? And
Well, yeah, I mean, so that, yeah, that was, I mean, AceNet did raise millions of dollars. I mean, it had at one time, 26 staff or something like that. But it wasn't just about AceNet. It was that there was about a dozen different organizations, parts of government, uh, agencies, all sorts, schools, all sorts of people were involved in the network there. And so that's just a really important thing to remember, that like a lot of the money that we brought in, went out to partners and other partners. Now I've left, and they're what's been 14 years ago or something. And other groups are writing grants and things like that. But I think one of the interesting things I learned at AceNet was that, I mean, we generated half of our income every year from our own kind of entrepreneurial activity. I mean, we were a nonprofit 501c3 and that, but we set it up so that we were, the kitchen incubator, for example, had rented out freezer space, and it rented out the use of a bottling line and things like that. We did technical assistance for people outside the network. There were rental income of all various sorts. And so, and products. And I mean, I think this thing about learning to productize what we're doing is really an important piece. And so, how to take what you've learned and put it into something that generates income. Like the Network Weaver Handbook, which I did, let's see, that's been almost 8 years. That was just taking all this learning, and that has really generated, it's still generating income every year, a sizable amount of income that then is being plowed. That's really what's supporting the Network Weaver site. So, to think about what you're learning and how it can be made into, toolkits or communities of practice or training sessions or whatever, and they don't have to cost a lot. You can always make sure there's equity funds available. But people, I think what we're learning is that how important it is to invest in our own learning. And as we do that, more people are going to be taking all kinds of trainings or looking for workbooks or guides or whatever, and those can be monetized without being, unfair. And if we could take all and that's what, like, the Network Weaver resource site is going to, I mean, it has a few things. Most of it's free because it's stuff from, years of my work, and we want to really get people having access to that information. Um, and but it's a vehicle for monetization of what people have learned. And I think there's so much out there that people have learned. They've made fabulous breakthroughs, and they don't even take the time to realize it, and let alone to productize it or write it up. So I think that's a really interesting stream too. But the thing is, there's this mental shift that like, so I have a donate button. Oh, if you appreciate these materials, contribute something. And I don't think it's well placed, but maybe once every 3 months I get a donation. Of course, maybe as Ben found out, maybe the button always doesn't work, but um so though, so I think there is a way that we need to uh stop thinking, and especially in the nonprofit world, that everything
Right.
needs to be free.
Right.
And we give away a lot of free stuff, and it's wonderful, but how to help move that into some kind of thing that can help support our work, so we're not so dependent on things like foundations.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Mm.
It sounds like those, resources that you developed and the physical assets that you used in that project on the ground were important elements to being successful. Are there any other elements that you want to mention about what made the experience with AceNet or Network Weavers, whichever one you want, successful, valuable?
I know that we are going to be trying to do some crowdfunding. It'll be really interesting to see, is all this groundwork, can we make a case for that, for the Network Weaver site? So it's going to be really interesting um, to see that. I think that one thing that to do is that the more diverse your network can be, uh, the more places you can reach into to bring resources into the network. And so that's why I think it's so important. And I know that happened here, so that schools can tap into certain different kinds of funds that ordinary economic development nonprofits can't. Government, and I think that we've all we've seen here that government will support activities. We had um, our government supported a whole series of sort of town halls where people broke up into interest groups and things like that. You can get government to support some of the work that you have if they're part of your network. And so I think that's the other thing is, having each different type of participants in networks thinking about where they can reach to be able to bring additional resources. But there's so many untapped things. Like, look at all the boomers out there who have maybe some resources. How many of US boomers have ever been asked, well, let's talk about estate planning? How could your resources help fund this, everything that needs to happen for this world to survive?
Hmm.
Anybody approach them about that? It's not like I have a whole lot stashed away by any means, but nobody's asked, nobody's really thought or talked to me about, okay, that could be part of a stream of resources. So I just think that there's still a lot of really interesting avenues that have not even been touched by
Hmm.
networks that I know.
Hmm.
I
Thank
think there's
you.
another thing that I learned is like it, and I'm learning more and more. So I'm working on a couple network projects with real enormous budgets. They're embarrassingly large, and I just like, you know, this is really maybe not the best way to go to. It's like we all. In fact, I'm really thinking that nonprofits ought to look at themselves and say, we need to reform. Our overhead is so high. Can we be more like a collaborative model where we don't have all this. I mean, sometimes you're right, investment like a kitchen incubator can be a source of revenue for a really long time, but sometimes, nonprofits, uh, they buy buildings or, you know, but rent, pay huge amounts in rent and other kinds of overhead when by having lighter, more network kind of relationships, they could operate on a much, much smaller budget. So one way of thinking about resources is thinking, hey, how can we think about resources so that we need a lot less resources
Mhm.
and so that we can operate? And I think that's what, now what and things like that, we're learning how to, operate in that little netherland between volunteerism and small amounts of money. And so
Mhm.
that's something I think I really learned from, all the things that I've worked with, uh,
Mhm.
in the last 4 decades or whatever, is think about, just think about how you can lower your overhead through new organizational forms. We're used to working virtually much more now. Do we really need all these huge spaces? Are there other ways we can get together? Um, and then you don't have to raise millions of dollars a year. You can get by on a smaller budget.
Running more lean, which
Yeah,
which
yeah,
we do. And when you're doing more collaborative work across many organizations, it's I think that that allows that kind of thinking, makes it easier.
yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So let's shift now to thank you for sharing those great stories about what you've been up to. And um, let's think dream into the future a little bit. So if you had 3 wishes right now to um, dream up the success, to support the success of your Network Weaver initiative, um, if that's the main thing that you're focused on, or anything else that you want to bring in, because I'm sure you're up to many things. What would your 3 wishes be to be successful?
Well, I'm really looking for models that are more local, more city, small town, neighborhood, community, whatever. Like how there could be models of um, getting pools of funds to do really innovative, important kinds of things on that level. So I just started thinking about that. Thinking that about that for the Athens community. For, we live in a university town. It's got all very liberal people in every single office, and yet how much are we doing? And then we're in an ocean of some of the most extreme poverty homes. you know I mean, hundreds, maybe thousands of homes out in the rural areas without running water or indoor facilities. I mean, I don't know if
Wow.
people realize that that exists here. And um, so what can we do? So here we've got enough work for many lifetimes, really. And what can we do? We have people who, are we don't have the super rich here at all, but we have people who could spare some money and try to generate that for various networks of activity, in the community. So how do but it does take some organizing capacity. And so how do you identify and find that organization, somebody that's able to organize even one little piece of and then how do you get the community to really buy in? I mean, it's one thing when you're, the political parties are texting you every 5 minutes and, oh, we're desperate, oh, we need this, we're only 1 point kind of thing, and that kind of stuff, which obviously gets the money out of the pockets but is a little bit ethically, dubious. How can we find a model that's just as compelling for our communities, to be able to you know to be able to support funds like that and really get funds, even a small community, how you can mobilize millions of dollars for the kinds of activities that you're going to need to end poverty or whatever your issues are, climate change or whatever. So that's one place where, I'm really starting to think about how the money can flow. And I know there are things like, I was talking to a guy from Wales, and they have raised unbelievable amounts of money. They're going to be zero, and maybe some of you folks who are British Isles know about this, but raised all the money for wind power or whatever, and people even earn income, earn a small income from investing in this wind power, and called community shares or whatever. And how can we learn from the models that are out there to be able to in a mix of something where you maybe earn some income and something that's just totally, donation based. So really interested in that. The other place that we really need to think about is sort of like what does in a sense is like bring, it seems the most, probably the most high value thing we could do is bring networks together, bringing networks together, and networks, different kinds of networks, around, I mean, like people, the whole environment, there's all these environmental organizations and networks and whatever. And to my sense, they're certainly not, I don't even know if they talk to each other. but a lot, I mean, some of them do maybe more on a local level, but there's still just so much network weaving that could happen by bringing some of these different networks together to build relationships, maybe align strategies, or at least to share learnings. I mean, there's so much. Again, I feel like the key thing for the next decade is going to be about, can we really learn from what we're doing? Can we really make sense of what we're doing and figure out what works and maybe do more of it? I think that we're so focused on doing, I think that's part of the dominant culture, it's doing without learning, whereas doing with spending huge amounts of time on reflection, so that you're like, oh, we never thought of that. Now I see, now we see our next step. But if we hadn't taken time to really look at what we're doing, and so, I think that is a place that really needs to be resourced, that we could just like a bunch of networks could say, oh, we need to get together and start being in a community of practice for the next 6 months or year and have a really good, really, I mean, I'm not kidding you. I think that's one of the, and they, that's not that expensive. You can to have a 6-month community of practice with, pop-ups in between. That's $25,000 to $50,000. That's not a lot. And the value that could come out of something like that could be huge. So, but there's nobody, I mean, I'm not kidding. The funding world is just, whether it's Silicon Valley funding or foundations, it just doesn't seem to recognize what's going on. I mean, do you realize there have probably been maybe a million. I mean, I was on this thing talking with people in India. There are like thousands of networks there that we don't even know about. We're not learning from what they're doing, and they're doing all kinds of amazing things. And so here's this huge resource out there. There's so many networks out there, and most of them are I don't know how to put this nicely. They're half-baked. The structures of networks are still mostly organizational. They have governing boards and things like that. And, so there's all these networks forming, but because they're getting slowed down because they don't know the latest interesting stuff that's happening about new kinds of self-organized governance. So trying to find a way to fund all this innovation that's in networks and helping the whole networks as the form of the 21st century really mature um and develop into some of the, in ways that really fit the values of being peer like. So I have no idea how we're gonna fund all that needs to happen, but it really, 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 it would speed us up so much if we could find funding for bringing networks and networks together. So
Well,
that's
Deb
only
and I are
three.
smiling because that's exactly what we're dreaming of
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah.
And we feel the same way, 25 to $50,000. And that's what this co-funding lab vision is for this
Mhm.
next year. But we're listening, we're reflecting to see
Trying to
what,
find.
reaching
Mhm,
out and seeing who's out there wanting to do what, because we
mhm.
want to do this as peers and with partners. So we have this vision that we want to dream up together, about what people are excited about doing together. What could this lab look like? And so our last kind of dreaming question is to imagine it's the end of next year, and you've spent 6 months to a year, in this year-long action learning uh, laboratory that's looking at um, funding together in different ways. And so the lab is anchored by a cohort of organizations, like I said, a group of us that are doing some kind of co-funding work together in our own networks, and then
Mhm,
sharing what we're learning, about
mhm,
being in
mhm.
our networks in some way, and probably doing some kind of practice together so that we can develop our capacity together. Um, and you know, developing capacity could be in areas of fundraising, in just what you were talking about, peer governance practices. How does that work? What does that look like?
Mhm,
How do we
mhm,
actually operate as a
mhm.
network instead of a hierarchical structure? And say that this lab was highly successful and the cohort member organizations are in a much stronger place than they were at the end of the year. So if you were to imagine yourself at the end of 2021 and you look back and say, how, what does this look like? How did you and your network participate? Who else was part of it? What happened? What did it feel like? Help us dream up something that fits your dream. What were
Oh,
you giving? What were
I think
you
that the self-organizing piece, of course, I have to get into that at some point here, but, I think that that network can't be abstract. I mean, I do think lots of relationship building needs to happen so people know who they want to work with. But I think a network is not going to move together in the way we usually think, with one even vision or one strategy. I think we need to do massive amounts of experimentation that we need to have, but with new partners, this guy Uzzi, really, I think his first name might be Brian, but anyway, he taught researched Broadway plays, and the ones that were successful had a couple people that had a really tight relationship, had worked with each other before, but it always had another couple people who were new. And the Broadway shows that were the most successful were the ones that had that mix of both, long-term existing relationships and new people. There's tricky things with that, but I think that that's having a network where people could find people who wanted to work on something together, and just all kinds massive amounts of experimentation out there and then sharing that learning both within the collaboratives and with the whole network. And so that's what I'd love to see, something like that, and to have funding resources, and maybe part of maybe initially small things, but to show just the value of this kind of self-organizing collaboration and massive learning, deep learning, and then sharing then what you've learned, so that then you can bring in larger resources. So I think we don't often think, we always think about some big grandiose thing, whereas it's often, if you have a bunch, especially a bunch of different projects kind of working on the same thing with different approaches. I've seen this happen in networks where, it was when you brought people together doing kind of the same thing, but doing it differently. And then you bring that together and people just steal ideas from each other. Oh yeah, oh, I never thought of that. Add that to their own projects. And then when those projects kind of end, being able to then the next generation of projects, which are hopefully bigger and
Right.
much more effective, because there's been all
Right.
that learning.
Right. Can you tell me, can you imagine how an innovation fund would work in this?
Oh
In
yeah,
this
and
lab?
innovation funds, the technology, I mean, the stuff on the network, we were thinking about the whole social technology of innovation funds has been really well established, and it's really simple, and it's extremely well developed. So you decide, you have a pot of money that you get, and that is put into, and it can be small. I've seen one $15,000. Others have, a couple $100,000, and they decide basically on the range of amounts they're going to give. And usually these are seed funds, so they're the first round. What I've never really seen the resources on, though I think a couple of examples are going to be happening soon, is like you have seed funds, and then the next generation gets a bunch more money, because it's building off the ideas from the first. But what you do is you have there's a scaffolding, a set of slides with the decisions you need to make about your fund. And these are all examples in the blog posts, um, and in the resources about how to do an innovation. But often, you can get maybe like 20, 30 people helping you design the fund, and just determining how much, what, how it's going to be equity focused and all that. Then you send out the RFP, so to speak, and then you get often maybe a couple hundred people to actually read the proposals, and there's a rubric for um, um, kind of rating them, and then a small group together, in a circle, so to speak, or governing decision-making body, is formed. Anybody who wants to be part of that then can make the final decisions on the proposals. And it's usually good if then those people who got these resources, and there should be for collaborative projects, not for individual projects, so people learn how to do that. And then if you can have them in a community of practice where they meet together, so that they're building their collaborative skills while they're doing that project, and they're sharing what they're learning and helping each other with challenges. It's just so simple. And to me, it's been one of the most successful things I've seen come out of networks is innovation funds, and what that does to building the network, because people from the network are working together, or they're sharing what they're learning, and with each other, and then with the whole network and beyond. So. And it's not that hard to get money for an innovation fund. It's very concrete, so funders
Right.
like it, and even people in your community, a GoFund kind of thing could fund an innovation network.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could all work together to get more and more people familiar with an innovation fund as a way in their community or whatever, that they could get innovative projects going.
Sounds so exciting. I agree. totally see an innovation fund as part of this too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, great. This is kind of a point to pause here to see if this is the end of the formal interview set of questions. I wanted to pause and see if Ben and Donya had anything more to, or Dunya had, sorry, learning how to say your name well, have anything to add or comment on before we open up the conversation.
Or maybe my thought was we have a little conversation, you know, the four of us, since the three of us are the core team right now holding this inquiry, and then we'll bring in other folks that are on the call, and perhaps even use some breakouts quickly too, because there's enough people here that if there's a desire to talk, then that'll support that. But let's stay just as a little foursome for maybe 10 minutes or so, since we're all steeped in what this inquiry is. I'm curious, Dunya, if you wanted to start with some reflections. What struck you about what you heard from June?
Ben, thank you, June, for sharing it. Yeah, for me it was extremely exciting to hear alignment in what you were saying, and what I feel I'm stepping into, the vision that Leslie and Ben, without really naming too much of it, I was really sensing into that there's something there. And what's really exciting to me is this, it nearly feels like learning how to manage money together is such a powerful way of deepening relationship, is one thing that I really am hearing from you. And so thank you for kind of opening my eyes to that possibility. Go ahead, Ben, if you have specific questions, and then perhaps questions will come to me.
Well, I was just going to echo what you were saying, and that's certainly been our experience with the TRCC and the collaborative funding work we've done, that it started from building relationships, but it also then became a way, by collectively managing a grant pool, to really deepen those relationships. It's not just about the money. In a sense, you were talking about overhead, June, and the inefficiencies of big nonprofits. And I was thinking, well, in our particular version of this, we actually have a pretty high overhead if you look at how much money we spend on facilitation and design and sort of creating and holding the space for the process. And that's not like money that's spent that just has no value, right? That as much as anything, as valuable as the money we're gathering and moving back out to our community of organizations is the experience that we're creating for one another, of sharing power and of getting to know one another, and learning how to do consensus-based decision making and all of this stuff. So I think there's a way to sort of to reclaim what has become this sort of dead weight of overhead in old paradigm work as something that's really like fertile soil, rather than wasted money. And yes, we want the crops, we want the food that's going to grow out of that, but the soil itself is also worth investing in. And I think networks offer a chance to do that. So I love that, just that bit of thinking that came to me as you were talking. And just how much aligned your work is with what we've been doing without our having collaborated or even told you a whole lot about what we're up to.
Yeah.
That was really fun to hear.
Leslie, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like we're just so incredibly aligned, and it's crazy to me that we haven't had a conversation in more depth until now, and maybe this is perfect timing to do that. I'm kind of popping with all these ideas of how to design the network structures that support innovation. And you talked about the innovation fund being at the seed level. In our Thriving Resilient Community Accelerator, we've been funding what we call seed rounds for projects, and we've also been funding projects at the next called the catalyst level,
Mm.
and they're managed separately with different levels of complexity. But and I can see how to build more of an ecosystem around it. And there's a piece that we have not done yet either, which is for the groups that have become what I'd call the senior or the elder organizations that have grown their capacity beyond what these small amounts of money can do. There's still a very valuable place in the ecosystem for them to play in terms of mentoring the younger and the middler organizations, and channel money to them. And that's part of the journey for me this time is filling out the ecosystem more. And I also liked what you said about the needing the different kinds of people involved. I'm really passionate about public-private people partnerships, particularly when you're working on a local and a regional level.
Mhm.
TRCC has been operating at a national level in the US, and we've had this kind of regional focus where we have many groups that are operating in the same regional areas and then some multi-region areas. And there are things that you can do in relationships that you can have at the local and the regional level
Mhm.
that we want to deepen into in this next round. More government involvement, which many of our regional organizations have a lot of government contracts and roles to play, and city climate action plans, and as an
Mhm.
example, in a couple cases of what we've worked with. There's something else I was thinking. Oh, and I am also passionate with you about figuring out how to move resources together, at the neighborhood and the local level, and kinds of some models that can do that. One of them that I'm loving right now in the Bay Area is called the Resilient Hubs framework. Are you familiar with that? That's a Urban Sustainability Directors Network, I think, framework that we're adopting in the Bay Area networks that are working together. And it's a emerging framework of resilient spaces and neighborhoods and sites. It's a way to get people involved at a grassroots level. And I'm imagining funding structures that can support that. I used to run our local community foundation. And I run our local road community service area where we have money that goes into our taxes, and we allocate money because I live in a rural area. So I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the structures that exist already that a lot of other people have no idea exist.
Mhm.
And to know what the limitations are of them. Like many community foundations have so many restricted funds that they can't play the role easily of being able to support this kind of whole systems work that really they're best suited to do, in my opinion. So I'm interested in creating network structures that allow the community foundations to play, for example.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
So those are some of the thoughts that are just stirred up by what you said. So let's keep playing.
I want to move us into, I think, 3 breakout groups in a minute to continue this and let some of the folks that are on the call speak, with one another and with some of us. So I'll scatter the 4 of us as well as best I can. But I'm curious, June, if you want to have some final reflections from this part before we do that.
No, it's just, no, I'm ready to go. I'd rather have more time in breakout rooms.
Yeah, great. And maybe one of the things to think about, especially for the two rooms that don't have June in them, is there a question you want to ask June when we come back? We'll leave a little bit of time for that too. So, something along those lines, and then we'll have a few words about now what in this inquiry to close. But we've got a half an hour to go here, so that should be plenty. I've got groups of 4 or 5, and one group will just stay here in the main room with me. So I'm going to go ahead and open them up. If let's see.
And how long are you thinking the great breakouts will be?
Should we go 15 minutes?
I think that sounds good. That's what I was hitting on to.
Yeah, so we'll have you'll have 14 minutes on the clock in your breakout, and then you'll get that 1-minute timer with the button to return to the main room. But use that final minute. Don't click the button, and you'll be brought back here automatically in 15 minutes. I think we are good to go. Here we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think Mark and Nancy. Oh, okay. What did I do? Yeah, Mark, Nancy, Suzanne, and Bruce, you're here with me. And we'll stop recording. All right. Welcome back to the main room, everyone. I know those always feel really short, but we do want to honor the basic time here. We can linger a bit beyond the 90 minutes. Certainly I can do that. Actually, not very much. We have some people coming over here in a bit, but we can leave the room open. But let's try to wrap this up with some collective conversation. Or I'm wondering, well, in our group, I know we did come up with a question for you, June, and maybe the other group that you weren't in also has one. So that might be a place to go. Or if we wanted to hear very briefly, just something that stood out for you from the conversation you were just in, we could do that too. Should we just hear like two or three of those, like 1 minute per person, and then we'll go to the questions. How about that? So what stood out for you in the conversation you just had? Just popcorn a couple of people.
I can share that in our group, I was very animated by the notion. There was this puzzling between, maybe in my community, locally, we're very few people that have these really strong interests. And how do we even grow this? Because we're very few. And then the question of how do we blend then the virtual communities where there's endless many people around the world who might have the same interest as you, and the work that's happening locally. And so what came up was, Lucy was sharing the dojos, the communities of practice that can happen online. So you're learning from all these people who are doing it. And then even if you're just a few locally, then you're tapping into an infinite amount of resources. So that was really exciting to blend the notion of local and global that way.
I was struck by, I know Mac from when I used to live in Cincinnati, and then June knows Mac. So there's already networks kind of happening, that it's a small, we kind of joked and said it's a small world. But reflecting on what Dunia just said, yeah, if you want to go real local, what's that in between the local and then this global, everything, how to tap into the right relationships and stuff. So great conversation in 15 minutes. I think it was very productive. My judgment. Yeah.
One more reflection. Someone from our group.
I'll say something. So we were talking about June's example in Wales of the co-op. Community shares sort of energy work, and we're all faced with this need to do this energy transition work to mitigate climate change, to build resilient, stronger communities, and to benefit from an ownership, that's more widely shared. We share all those desires. In my case, I'm in a community with one closed coal plant and another one that's going to close shortly, and a big hole in the municipal tax budget for the schools. So that we now have a motivation to add to that, to talk to each other across these, ideological divides and, organizational silos and all that. But now, but I need to be connected to people like you to do this more effectively. See, so that's why I'm grabbing the microphone and saying, community shares Wales is sort of symbolic of something. Don't more of us need to do something like that? Well, let's try it.
Well, and then we took another way and said, okay, what are these really high value things communities want to learn, like how to set up a successful solar co-ops and networks of solar co-ops. And that's something people would pay money for. So to have training sessions like that are communities of practice, that then while you're doing the training, you're constructing a toolkit. You have some graphics people taking what's learned from those, and then that can be sold, as well by those, originating groups or by the group that does the session. So finding those things that where, like then we talked about with Tina, who's doing conflict resolution. Could she get together with some others on all the collaborative skills you need, make a toolkit, get it into the schools, or get trainings, someone to fund trainings in the schools? And so it's constantly thinking about how you can have income generating that then also can scale out to a really lot of people.
One of the organizations that's part of this inquiry is Co-op Power, that does solar power cooperatives in the Northeast, and there's also the People Solar Fund, Solar Energy Fund, that's kind of a related initiative, collaboratively funding lots of that work, and we're hoping to do another interview with folks involved with that as part of the series, actually. We had a question in our group that maybe I want to move to, that came from Nancy. And is it okay, Nancy, if I just sort of paraphrase it for June? So she's part of a network in Pennsylvania, that's local government and nonprofits that's pretty much largely a white community of practice. And she's gotten connected with an African-American woman in Chicago that has a very robust network, similar kinds of organizations, but almost exclusively people of color. And they had a very successful kind of cross-pollinating event, and they want to do another one. But Nancy noticed how different the language was of the two groups and the challenges involved in that. And so she was wondering if you had some suggestions in terms of design and structure and resources for that kind of cross-pollinating, or the idea even of building a network together, that brings these two groups in. And I thought, I know that kind of work is near and dear to you, so I figured you'd have a lot to say.
Yeah. I mean, so I think a couple things, first giving this larger frame, we are different. We have different languages, and maybe giving people, a Google Doc where they can say, okay, here's the language of this group. Here's a language of another group. And then spending really a lot of time building relationships, because when people get like one-on-one or with two people and they're telling their life stories or what they care about or their children or their cats or whatever, then the language matters less and people are willing to open up. But I think framing it, saying this is like we're almost like from different countries, we're speaking different languages, and really be thoughtful about that. And if you need translation, or if you want to ask questions, that's where going into small breakout rooms where you spend time just getting to know each other, can be so incredibly valuable. But also specific things where people are putting down different language. When I mean this, when I say this, I mean whatever, and having almost like a glossary. And it just helps people be more aware and more accepting and tolerant. Because I think people are saying, don't use jargon. Well, I think jargon is like often really useful, but you just have to recognize it for what it's a certain community's way of talking about stuff, and that they need to be sensitive. Other people won't know what it means, or it needs to not be a wall.
Do you have a follow-up to that, Nancy, or is that a good start from here?
No, I think that's really helpful. And I think the relationship building did, happen. And I think that it's good to build on that. And there was something about being from different places, Pennsylvania versus the Chicago region, that helped us to say, oh, we could say anything we want. We kind of joked across the way it is there versus here.
Joking is always good.
Yeah.
Having fun.
But on a more serious level, I do think that if I was to propose, we're planning next week. If I was to propose, what if we actually created a network? Like, and I guess I just have to pose that question.
Remember, networks don't have to be formal. Just say, yeah, a network can mean whatever we want it to mean.
Right.
It doesn't have to mean that we have a governance board and this and that. It just means we're committed to staying in touch and sharing what we're learning and helping each other out.
But also growing it, like that's what I'm thinking is like, this is just a start. How do we, I'm thinking of proposing that. How do we think outside what we've just done and invite others in so that next time we have this, there's actually another. Yeah, okay.
Well, there's stuff, look at the stuff on 3-level networks or I don't know what I call it.
What is 3-level networks? So you mean, are you
3-level networks or networks of networks, and helping them understand the power of that. That's so powerful when they can learn from people who are different and have different experience.
Okay.
That there might be something in there on that Network Weaver page.
Thank
on the
you.
Network Weaving website.
Yeah, I did check out your website. Well, yeah, earlier, and it's very exciting. So I will share that.
Were there other questions for June that came up in the other group? Or
I have a question. June, when you're talking about putting things out there for like workshop fees or space rental or whatever to bring money into the organization, are you thinking that the money that comes into the organization funds just the activities of the organization, or also is there a way that people who are doing some of the training can get some money for doing that, so that everything isn't just given away?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to have livelihoods, and so that's part of what you got to figure out. Different groups are different, and I think it's really important that people talk authentically about their needs, and and so everybody might not get paid the same. And so I think lots of people are having honest conversations like that some people can volunteer, some can work for a small amount, some people need larger amounts.
Yeah, great. I wanted to share something with Nancy. I was just thinking as you're speaking, Nancy, that's what Ben did. Was he started with now what 3 years ago, and it was very small when we first started, and every time with every edition, new people show up, and some core people have formed that show up regularly and become kind of collective members and help support that show up on calls and discussion groups and offer things time after like with each edition people may offer some same things, and yeah, it's just been growing and growing, but it takes time, and I noticed that's what we all do. And I was listening to you, June, and really appreciating what you were saying about just putting in the effort, and I have so come to realize that it just takes time.
mm-hmm.
And then we have to stick
time.
with it. That's a good segue, right?
Yeah, we've got a little less than 5 minutes to go. Mark, I know you had your hand up and you wanted to make a quick comment, or?
Yes, it's a really quick one. June, when I listen to you, I'm wondering if I'm hearing network or I'm hearing collective. Is there a difference to you?
Well, see, my definition of like a self-organizing network or a system shifting network, there are many, like you think of it like here's the network right here on this level, and then out of it are popping what I call them collaboratives, whatever, collaborative projects are popping out of that all the time, different ways. And that's where, you the rubber hits the road. You're actually acting and trying to learn, and then you bring that down to the whole network and help it learn so that the next projects that come out. So I see that collectives or collaboratives, I usually use collaboratives because that's idea of more short term. And that is good because it helps you learn. You have to stop, you're done. And then if you take the time to learn, then your next project hopefully will be, you know, much better, more impactful. So I see them as both part of a whole, you know, so I don't see, I mean, no collective should be alone. You know, you want collectives to be part of networks, even, you know, even if it is a longer term collective. Collectives, collaboratives, they make more sense when they're part of something, you know, a bigger set of people, because then you're going to be able to share and it's going to go out to a large number of people and really affect change, that kind of change that you want.
I mean, the distinction that you've drawn between networks in general and system shifting networks, I think, is a really powerful concept. That informed Now What, going back a year ago in October, November 2019, that was one of our deep dive themes. And I highly recommend you have a whole set of papers, I think, on the website about system shifting networks and what it means to have a network that really has that capacity and has that as a goal, as opposed to a lot of other, you know.
I'm going to be writing full time next year. So I'm hoping, but you can check out, if you want to go to medium.com/June Holley, there you can get all the stuff I've written, kind of instead of having to go through everything. There's so much stuff on the Network Weaver blog.
And we can, you know, certainly share those resources out. I do want to take just a minute to say that this has been part of the Now What Global Gathering, as well as the Flourishing Futures Open Space. And we just have a new thing. We recorded a little video to just kind of apropos what, you know, the topic here, and financial flows. And Now What is something that pops up twice a year, and typically about 300 people register, although it's a little smaller this time around. We're going till June 20th, and you can find out more at nowwhat2020.com. But I just want to play you this little message about the gift economy structure that we use. Thank you all for your time. We can linger after the bottom of the hour as well, but we'll close with this. Maybe I'll stop the recording too.
I want to thank June for being here today and sharing her heart and her wisdom with everyone, for everybody else who came today too.
Yes, thank you, Leslie, too, for
It's lots of fun.
the interview. All right, here we go.